If I asked you to name America's biggest exports, you would probably say the obvious things: airplanes, computer chips, cars, oil, corn by the shipload. And you would be right about most of them. But sitting quietly near the top of that same list is a product that catches almost everyone off guard because it does not come out of a factory or a farm or an oil field. It comes out of people. It is human blood, and more specifically, the pale golden liquid inside it. And it has grown into one of the most valuable things this country sells to the rest of the world. We are not talking about a small, strange side business either. In a single recent year, blood-related products brought in well over $30 billion in exports. By some measures, that puts blood ahead of American coal, and even ahead of American gold. It ranks among the country's most valuable export categories, sitting on the charts in the same company as heavy machinery and shiploads of farm goods. Think about that for a second. The unremarkable liquid inside ordinary blood is, on the global market, worth more than the gold we have prized for thousands of years. So, how did America turn human blood into a multi-billion-dollar export that quietly supplies most of the planet? It comes down to biology, economics, and one uncomfortable decision that most of the world made and America refused to. Let me start with what is actually being sold, because it is not quite what most people picture. When you imagine donating blood, you probably think of the classic red bag, the kind that goes to accident victims and surgeries. That is one thing. But the real money is in something else entirely. It is called plasma. Plasma is the pale, straw-colored liquid that carries your blood cells around. Remove the red blood cells and you are left with this golden fluid, and it turns out to be packed with rare and incredibly useful proteins. Those proteins can be separated out and turned into a whole family of medicines that keep millions of people alive. Treatments for immune disorders, for serious bleeding conditions, for a long list of illnesses where the human body cannot make something it desperately needs. And here's the strange part. We do not have a machine that can build these proteins from scratch. There is no factory that manufactures them. The only source on the entire planet is other human beings. That single fact is what makes this entire business possible. When the only place a life-saving ingredient can come from is people, and the demand for the medicines made from it keeps climbing every year, you have created something rare in the modern economy. A product with almost unlimited demand and a supply that can only come from millions of individual donors, one appointment at a time. That combination is worth an extraordinary amount of money, and the world figured that out. And that demand has only pointed in one direction, which is up. The medicines made from plasma are not some niche curiosity. The flagship products are used against a long and growing list of conditions, and as populations age and doctors keep finding new uses for them, the need climbs higher year after year with no ceiling in sight. Every one of those treatments traces back to a real person who sat in a chair and gave up an hour of their day. There is no synthetic shortcut sitting in a lab somewhere. More demand simply means more donations, which means more centers, more collection, and a machine that has to grow and grow to keep up. But this is where the story takes its strange turn, because there was a fork in the road, and different countries walked down very different paths. Decades ago, the world's health authorities looked at the blood supply and reached a conclusion that sounded noble and safe. They decided that blood should ideally come from volunteers who give it freely, out of generosity, with no payment involved. The reasoning was that people who donate purely to help others are less likely to hide health problems than people showing up because they need the cash. And that fear was not just theoretical. Decades ago, before screening was anywhere near as good as it is today, the transmission of disease through blood products in the 1970s and 80s caused a major public health crisis, one that pushed the whole world toward far stricter safety rules. The scars from that era ran deep, and they hardened a belief that a blood supply built on payment was a supply you could never fully trust. So a global goal was set, encouraging countries to build their blood systems entirely on unpaid, voluntary donation. And most of the world took that advice and ran with it. Country after country made it effectively off limits to pay someone for their plasma. The US went the other way. Here, it stayed perfectly legal to compensate people for donating their plasma. And that one difference, paying versus not paying, quietly reshaped the entire global market. Because it turns out that relying purely on the kindness of strangers is a lovely idea that does not produce nearly enough plasma. When you ask people to give up an hour of their time over and over for free, most of them simply do not. But offer them $30, $40, $50 for that same hour, and suddenly the centers fill up. Payment, whether you find it comfortable or not, is astonishingly effective at getting plasma into the supply chain. So, America, the country that kept paying, ended up producing a staggering share of the world's plasma. Not a slice, not a healthy majority. Something close to 70% of all the plasma used on the entire planet comes out of America. 7 out of every 10 units worldwide sourced from American donors. And now you can see the trap the rest of the world walked into. All those countries that proudly banned payment still need these medicines just as badly as anyone else. Their patients are not going anywhere. So what do when their own voluntary systems cannot come close to keeping up? They import, and quietly and in enormous quantities. They buy the plasma and the plasma products they refuse to collect at home. Europe alone brings in a huge portion of the plasma it uses from outside its borders. The countries that decided paying for plasma was wrong solved that moral problem in the most modern way imaginable. They outsourced it to America. And that dependence carries a hidden risk. When most of the world leans on a single country for the bulk of a life-saving supply, anything that disrupts that country's collection ripples outward to patients everywhere. A drop in donations, a shock to the system, a stretch where fewer people show up to give, and hospitals thousands of miles away can suddenly find themselves short of medicines they cannot make on their own. The comfort of letting someone else handle the uncomfortable part comes with a quiet catch. You are now depending on them, and on the steady flow of millions of strangers rolling up their sleeves in a country far away. Let me take you inside the machine that actually makes this happen, because it is bigger and more organized than most people realize. All across America, there are thousands of plasma collection centers. You have almost certainly driven past one without a second thought, tucked into a strip mall or on a busy street. Walk in, get screened, and you can donate your plasma, get paid, and walk out. And unlike giving whole blood, which you can only do every couple of months, plasma can be given far more often. A donor in America can legally come as often as twice a week. The average works out to around 20 visits a year, but the most dedicated donors can give 100 times or more. Each visit puts a modest payment in their pocket and another unit of that golden liquid into a global supply chain. Here is the part that deserves an honest word without either cheerleading or hand-wringing. Those centers are very often placed where the payment makes the biggest difference, and for many donors, the compensation is a genuine draw. It works less like charity and more like a small, steady source of supplementary income, which is a big part of why the centers stay so busy. That blend of money and medicine is exactly what makes the whole subject feel a little uneasy, and that is a fair thing to sit with. It is also the reason the treatments get made. Both of those things are true at once, and pretending either away does not make it less so. So, what happens next is pure industrial scale. A handful of large companies run much of this network. They collect the raw plasma, then ship it to specialized facilities where it is processed, purified, and separated into those valuable protein medicines. From there, the finished products fan out across the globe to hospitals and clinics in dozens of countries. A donation given in a small American town can end up as a treatment injected into a patient on the other side of the world. American donations, in a very literal sense, are helping medicate the planet. The logistics behind all of this are a quiet marvel in their own right. Plasma is frozen fast and kept deeply cold at every step, stored and shipped at freezing temperatures across oceans and continents without ever thawing. People inside the industry sometimes call it gray gold, a nod to just how much value is packed into this unglamorous fluid. The whole operation, from a donation chair in a strip mall to a refined vial in a hospital thousands of miles away, is a sprawling global supply chain that most of us never notice, moving a product that can only ever come from other people. So step back and take in the full shape of this thing, because few trades on Earth are as quietly remarkable as this one. The world looked at the idea of paying people for their blood and, for understandable reasons, decided it felt wrong. Most nations built systems around that principle and patted themselves on the back. But the demand for the medicine did not care about anyone's principles. It kept right on growing. And so a gap opened up between what the world needed and what it was willing to collect. And America stepped straight into that gap and filled it, turning a tightly regulated global need into a multi-billion-dollar national export. Being uncomfortable with a market does not make the market disappear. It just decides who gets to run it. That is why blood sits up there on the export charts next to coal and gold. Not because America is uniquely desperate or uniquely generous, but because it made a different call at that fork in the road, and then built an entire industry in the space everyone else refused to occupy. The most valuable thing a country can export, it turns out, might be the one thing you truly cannot manufacture. More of us. Right, before you go, let me ask a small favor. If this completely rearranged something in your head about where medicine actually comes from, give the video a like. That one tap does more than you would think to push a deep dive like this in front of the right people. And I am curious what you make of all this. Does paying people for their plasma strike you as a smart, life-saving system, or as something that should make us squirm? There is no clean answer, and I would honestly love to read your take in the comments. Tell me your verdict, and drop in what country you are watching from too, because I suspect this one lands very differently depending on where you live. If you want more of the hidden machinery behind the everyday world, the stuff nobody thinks to explain, subscribing is the easiest way to keep it coming. Thank you for giving me your time today, and I mean it when I say, I hope you look at the world a little differently now.